Okay, I think we have a couple of people in, and we can get started, and the rest can join as we go along. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and joining us on time. We This is the workshop on non-human personas for climate-aware design, hosted by Ideate Innovation. Um, for the next 90-ish minutes, 60 to 90 minutes, we will be your host. Hi, I'm Faizan. I'm the service design lead at Ideate. Um, Interesting story. I recently joined them like 3 months ago, but I worked with them for 4.5 years, a couple of years ago. Then I took a break with like startup world, but I'm back here. A lot of my work has been in financial inclusion and healthcare, and designing community spaces. And I'm excited to be hosting this workshop for you. Nayab, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi guys, I'm Nayab. I've been with Ideate for almost 3 years now, and like Fazan, I've done a lot of work on financial inclusion, sexual and reproductive health, and I think my new focus is climate change and the intersection of gender-based violence with climate change. So yeah.
Perfect. Cool. Thanks. Just a little bit about Ideate. So Ideate Innovation is a human-centered design firm that is on its goal to building a more equitable world. And we do this by focusing on three service areas. The first is experience and brand design. The second is service and business innovation. The third is research and strategic insights. And this is essentially whatever design work you have, we offer full cycle services to get that done. And over the years, we have worked with different types of clients, different countries of clients. So we work with multinational organizations like Unilever, Telenor, Dialog, also international design firms like IDEO, UX Design, Bopping, and then also development sector organizations like the Gates Foundation, World Bank, and GSMA. And so a lot of our work is we do like different we operate in different industries. So financial inclusion and the fintech industry is a major part of that. Then we've also worked in the healthcare domain, particularly maternal health, and then also a lot of women empowerment work, social protection work, work in agriculture, and then some commercial startup work also. So that is like a brief about Ideate, and because we're like uh, we're all about design, and we are a design agency, so we do work with lots of different clients in different consulting capacities. So it's important for us to be thinking about how our designs and how our choices and decisions impact uh, people or entities outside of the specific domain that we're working in. So thinking holistically about other life forms and the planet in general. So I think it was important for us to take this step at this moment and also share whatever we've been trying to achieve and work towards with you guys here. So coming to starting off the workshop with this question on what is your understanding of human-centered design? And we had asked this question in the form that you filled in when you RSVP to this workshop. And I saw a lot of like you all had the journal idea and it's all correct. And there was a lot of definitions around empathizing with the people you're designing for, design a product and service that is customized to the user, approach that's centered around the needs of the people that you want to design for. It's about bringing people together, fostering community. Then there is some around it locates the needs and desires of humans above anything else, and that's an interesting one. And you'll find out why as we go move along in this workshop. And then human-centered design is essentially based on the user. So a lot of talk about the human and the user and people, and that is all great, but there are some sub questions and sub scopes that I want you to also think about, which is who is this human that we are designing for? The human that we talk about in our definitions, who is that? Is it the direct user of the problem that you're solving? Is this user a single person or just a couple of people? Is it particular people at particular moments? Because when you design for things, you sort of design there are multiple parts to any sort of design intervention that you do. So, at what point are you trying to make the intervention and who are the people that you're designing for? And is it everyone who comes into contact with that design? So, who is it really when we talk about people and users? So narrowing down who are these people and users that we want to talk about and try to design for. If you look at these two pictures, so we're going to pick one thing that's very common for all of us and we've all interacted with almost on a daily basis, which is roads. If you look at these two pictures, who do you think roads are designed for? And feel free to type in the chat or just unmute your mic and say design for cars. Okay. What else?
I want to say the one on the left, since it has pedestrians, or maybe both people and the car. But the one on the right, there's solely for cars, maybe.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's designed for elites. Okay. Yes, it's a design for mobility. Fine. Um, okay, so these are two pictures that I showed you. If we come to these two more pictures, who do you think these are designed for? Humans? Okay. People, everyone. It's designed for mobility outside of cars. Great. That's great. So we're sort of transitioning from specifically just cars or just, drivers in these cars, and then moving towards humans in a broader sense about people who need to interact with these streets, with these roads, who need mobility, access to pathways to get to where they want. There is still a lot of parking, that's true. But so then there's a concept of primary users and then secondary users that you're designing for. Cyclists, yes. And if I show you the next picture, let's say this one, who do you think this is designed for? Or even this one,
Animals, maybe.
animals, yes. Life, nature, wildlife, true. Humans and environment, both, travelers, all of these are correct. So as you can see, it's the same intervention. It's essentially roads or highways, but the way you design them and the way you keep who you're designing for in mind, you change what that looks like and who you're impacting. In the first couple of pictures, it was just like very jam-packed. It was just like more driver focus. And someone did mention there was a pedestrian, they saw some pedestrians. Uh, so again, that was like you had to sort of really focus. Okay, there are some people who are walking on the sides. The second one was a little more visible. You could see cyclists, you could see people walking. That was more sort of conscious of who else is going to be accessing these roads. And then over here, this is actually in Netherlands. There's a specific term for this. I sort of forgot it. Where it's, so whenever they build highways in the middle, if it goes through a middle of, wildlife enclosures or just green pastures, they make sure that there is a path for the naturally existing wildlife over there to pass over. And if you see, there's also in the first picture, there's also a pedestrian bridge that is going from one place to the other. So these are all factors or like indicators that whoever was designing for was designing not just for the mobility of people in cars and trucks, but also making sure that mobility does not disrupt the natural patterns of animals and humans who want to cross over. Obviously, it did disrupt in some ways because obviously there is now one path that they need to cross through, but at least it's starting to, keep them in mind as opposed to not having any sort of crossing for them. And so our understanding of what it means to be human-centered impacts what we design. Because again, human could be the driver, it could be the cyclist, it could be the pedestrians, in this specific context, but the same sort of principles apply to any other intervention that you're also trying to do. And often our understanding veers into a very narrow interpretation of what a human is, and it carries the risk of doing more harm than good because you are very focused in your approach on just designing for a particular type of people and ignoring everyone else. And there are two examples that I'm going to share for this, two examples that are more or less everyone knows about. And generally, the idea for them is that they're making life easier for the group of people. But I'm going to share some ways where they're not the best choices if you look at people or just entities outside of the narrow sphere that they want to cater towards. So Airbnb, so there have been several reports and several researches done on this that Airbnbs, wherever they're located, they increase the overall rent of that location, and it makes it very difficult for people to afford housing, and it actually disproportionately affects people of color in that, because Airbnb has had instances where it has more non-people of color on it, and they rent out to only, they tried not to rent out to people of color. And then also, if there is a space that's being rented, they increase the rents of every apartment or every sort of housing around it. So there's like a problem of gentrification also that's coming around. And it also disrupts cohesion in the neighborhood. So that community and well-being that comes from people being permanent residents, that is disrupted. Because obviously, people come in for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, and then they leave. Um, and like I mentioned, the benefits of Airbnb, they sort of discriminate against communities of color. And another one of the most important parts of how this is impacting the environment is that the resource use at these Airbnbs, whether that's electricity, whether that's water, whether that's some other type of resource, it is 3 times higher than the permanent residents at that place. Because there are not enough checks going on, and then everyone has their own needs, and they're, not really ensuring that they are sustainable and mindful of the resources that they're using in this. Yes, it's also disrupting communities because it's optimized for seasonal use and not permanent residents. The second example is Uber. So it's Uber or any sort of, ride-hailing application. So yes, it has made life easier for people who need mobility and agency. But on the other hand, it has also led to loss of livelihood for traditional taxi operators. It has also increased traffic congestion and displaced public transportation. So there have been instances that because of the rise of ride-hailing services, money that goes into public transportation has been cut. And that has obviously impacted people who depend on public transportation, who don't have enough money to go to take Uber every day to their work. It has also increased individual and collective pollution because of traffic congestion. So when you're stuck at a place, it's leading to air pollution and noise pollution. And there's also a problem of deadheading, which is basically, so ride-hailing drivers, they roam around a community or a neighborhood trying to look for rides, even though, so it's basically they're not really heading anywhere. They're just, spending their fuel, they, adding to the carbon footprint and emissions, just trying to get a ride. And this is such a common problem that actually a term for it that's deadheading for this. And these are just like two examples. And if you, try to really look at design interventions, and especially interventions that we think have been really life-changing, you will figure out that while it might be life-changing and really beneficial to a group of people, it has negative impacts on other people around that. So essentially, the design choices that we make can be harmful not just to humans, but to the environment and the planet as a whole. So it's important to rethink who and what we want to be the center of our design methods and our philosophies, because failure to do so will keep adding to the already immense burden that's there of challenges that are faced by humanity, primarily being of climate change. Because if you continue to design for just like humans in a narrow sense, or even just humans and not considering the environment, the animals, and other entities, you will we're all just heading in that direction where it's going to be impossible to turn things around or like even put a dent into making things better. So if we think about design centricity and what it means to be human centered or life centered or planet centered, this is sort of a design centered spectrum that we've sort of started to think towards. On the left side of this is individual, so that's individual centered design. This is when your definition of who you want to design for is very, very narrow towards very particular individual or very, a very small group of people that is just their needs and you're not really regarding anything else. The one that comes afterwards is human-centered design. So this does take into consideration humans in a broader sense, where you're not taking care of just like one individual or a few individual, but you want to target a specific demographic or a specific persona. When you move a little bit outside of this, you come to community-centered design. So in human-centered design, yes, you're designing for the human that is part of that challenge, or for the humans that are facing a particular challenge. But when you try to broaden it even further and go into community-centered design, you try to look at how your design impacts the community around it. And that community can be defined by the neighborhood, it can be defined by ethnicity, it can be defined by similar experiences that were shared. This community can also be a town or a city, so it depends on what you define as community, but the essential principle is to expand your circle of who you're designing for and who you're considering in your design. When you move beyond community-centered design, you come to life-centered design. So that is when you're thinking of community, you might be thinking of humans or like even non-humans within that community. But when you think of life-centered design, it's life in general overall. So, plants and trees and animals and any other sort of life forms that might be impacted or come into contact with the design. So you try to design with all life forms at its center. And the one on the far right is planet-centered design or climate and environment-centered design. The little difference between life-centered design and planet or climate environment-centered design is that when you talk about planet and climate environment, it might also include like non-life forms, but also just like entities that are very important to the planet. It could be, let's say, an ecosystems. It could be rivers, it could be the oceans, it could be the mountains, it could be the rainfall cycles that happen. So how are you impacting all of these things that make up the planet a habitable and a healthy place to be? And before you get from, community-centered design to life-centered or planet-centered, there's a lot of things that need to be done because you can't immediately hop on, okay, let's do life-centered design from tomorrow. Because there is a learning curve involved, and you need to be very mindful of how you're trying to be life-centered, how you're trying to be sustainable in your approaches, how you're trying to be making sure that there's like upcycling involved and recycling involved in all of that. So we sort of, try to make it a little more manageable by going in between first and thinking about life-aware design and life and planet-aware design. And what is that essentially is that before you try to design for life or for our planet, you need to be conscious and knowledgeable of the non-human actors that are involved in your intervention. So you start by just being knowledgeable and aware and recognizing that yes, your design has an impact on other life forms and on the planet in general. And you take it from there. And you take that as a first step towards truly being life-centered or planet-centered. And so to be aware of non-human entities in our design, they must have a voice at the table. And what this means is that you need to be consciously designing for them and you need to give them personhood. You need to acknowledge their needs and their challenges and other attributes that we traditionally only assign to humans. So to acknowledge their relationship with design, we need to create their personas. And personas are essentially, we'll come to that, but essentially you're giving voice to whoever you're trying to design for. And you're trying to note down their motivation, their challenges, their needs, and other elements that are part of a persona. I am going to share a link to a video in the chat. I think it's like just 4 or 5 minutes long. I want you all to take uh, those minutes and just watch this video because this is essentially a video that UN made for a landfill. So this is basically from the perspective of a landfill that's speaking to the people. So it's personification of a landfill site. And I'm gonna give you guys like 5-ish minutes to go through this, and then we can come back and continue. If you're all back, let me know. Just type in the chat so that we can continue. Okay, cool. Okay, so like you saw, that it takes this is basically a 4 minute narrative of what the landfill dump site is feeling, how human actions are impacting it, and how it is sort of providing livelihood and all of these other things that we don't really consider, because in our head, dump sites or landfill sites are a nuisance that should not be there. But this is sort of trying to give it personhood and trying to bring it to life that there are things that you are not considering when it comes to these things. Um, and if you and another example of non-human personas is where this very interesting story, and it's not in the same way as a landfill, but it just goes to show how stories and the things that go behind them sort of just bring inanimate objects to life. So this is Michael Collins. He was one of the astronauts who went to the moon with Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. So the moon mission was basically three astronauts. Two of them actually, stepped on the moon, and one of them, which is this person, he was part of that command module that was supposed to be in orbit. So when they went to space, it was the mission had the command module and the lunar module. The lunar module is the one that detached from the command module and went to the moon when they were near the moon. And this person was not on that module. He was part of the module, which is basically it was the command center where he had to make sure that the communication was running fine and everything else was going fine according to plan. So he was not, his task was not to step on the moon, but to just stay in orbit and make sure that he could bring the two astronauts back home. And part of that mission involved him being on the other side of the moon. So, like, the moon is tidally locked, which means it does not rotate on its axis. It's like the side that we see on the moon is permanently the side that we see. We don't see the other side of the moon. So when you're in orbit, you're going to the dark side. And when you go to that back side, you are completely cut off from the rest of the world. There is no communication, there is no human. So he was literally the world was on one side and he was on the other side. So when the two astronauts actually stepped foot, he had no knowledge that that moment had happened while the rest of the world witnessed it. And in that moment, when he was on the other side of the moon, he had this Walkman. So this was around 10 years before the Sony Walkman was, released to the public. So this was a prototype that was built for NASA that these astronauts were allowed to take into space because it had a recorder and they also allowed them to take some mixtapes along with them. So each of these three astronauts had their favorite songs on them. So in that moment, when he was completely cut off, this Walkman was the closest thing he had to a human because he could talk to it and he could also hear from it. And just that little thing that, this is the only connection he has to the world, and this little device, this metallic box, that just, suddenly makes this Walkman, this device a lot more special. And these are the stories and the experiences that sort of bring you these things to life, and they help you think about how humans interact with them, and also the impact that they have on humans and why we need to be considerate about how we're designing things. And other than these specific stories, non-human personas and this idea and concept of being empathetic towards non-entities, non-human entities, and giving personhood to, other life forms is not new, and it's not specific to one region or one place or one group of people. It has existed throughout history in different cultures. So the picture you see on the left, there is this religion in Japan called the Shinto religion, and there's this concept of kami in it, which essentially gives a lot of reverence to naturally occurring things. And it's not just mountains or rivers or these like permanent things, but it also like climate uh, climate phenomena like rainfall and tornadoes, and droughts and all of these other things. And it brings them to life because these are things that it considers very important in that religion. The one you see on the right is basically totems in indigenous people in America and Canada. We have a version of this also called animism in Africa also, where there are these mythologies attached to non-human beings, and again they're very respectful towards these, and they consider these a strong part of their cultures. Two other examples closer to home is the one on the left is the river Ganga in India. So Ganga itself is considered to be a goddess in Hinduism. So these are again giving personas and personhood and being part of belief systems in South Asia. The thing you see on the right is actually a very interesting thing, and I would really encourage you to read up on this. This is the Tower of Silence in Mumbai. This is the burial site of Parsis in the community, and I don't have time to go into the details, but this is one of the most impacted place of worship, place of religion, or just like culture due to development around it, and climate change and all of these other things that have had a very devastating impact on the Parsi community. So if you do have the chance to, have time, please look up Towers of Silence. There's some very interesting and some very thought-provoking thing about how what we do to the planet is impacting cultures and beliefs and lifestyles. And so when we consider non-human personas, you're not just being cognizant of the surroundings, you're also being very respectful of cultures and beliefs. And that is a very important part of building trust in what you're trying to design. Because if you're like ignorant of these things, maybe your design will work for a little while, but if it's not considering the overall temperature, the cultural temperature, and the sensitivities of the community of the life, that you're trying to design for and the planet in general, in the long run, it's going to fail. And I'm going to pass on to Nayab now, who's going to tell you a little more about non-human personas before you jump into some activities.
Okay, so this is a nice segue into because we were just talking about other cultures and how non-human personas are perceived there. Sky Woman Falling was a very interesting reading that we shared with you guys. Did any of you get a chance to read it? It's okay if you didn't because I'm gonna explain it here, but if you did, just let me know. Okay, great. Ibrahim read it. If you like, would you like to talk a little bit about it and what the story of Sky Woman is, or Mariam?
I think the story has just important lessons about how there's a whole ecosystem and how that ecosystem is very much in coherence, in conversation with each other, and like any part of the ecosystem, when like an organism, when any part of the ecosystem is impacted, it has larger implications on the health and well-being of the larger system. So just thinking of it, I like to think of it as a system, and that was my read on the story, of how the earth was born, how this how that is connected to the gods and the concept of birth and rebirth. So I think that is my read on the story.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for sharing that. And basically, Sky Woman is a creation story. So how, every religion has a creation story, every culture has a creation story. Sky Woman um, is a creation story for the Iroquois tribe in America. They're Native Americans. And the story goes that there is a woman who was pregnant and she descended from the sky on this turtle, and she gave birth to, different species of animals and plants and trees and rivers. And that's how Turtle Island, which is the land of the Iroquois, was made. So if we go to the next slide, we're just going to read an excerpt of Sky Woman Falling. And would anyone like to volunteer to read this?
I love reading aloud, so I can do it.
Okay, thanks, Mariam. Please go ahead.
In the Western tradition, there is a recognized hierarchy of beings, with, of course, the human beings on top, the pinnacle of evolution, the darling of creation, and the plants at the bottom. But in native ways of knowing, human people are often referred to as the younger brothers of creation. We say that humans have the least experience with how to live, and thus the most to learn. We must look to our teachers among the other species for guidance. Their wisdom is apparent in the way that they live. They teach us by example. They've been on the earth far longer than we have been and have had time to figure things out. They live both above and below ground, joining sky world to the earth. Plants know how to make food and medicine from light and water, and then they give it away.
Fizan, could you go to the next slide, please?
I like to imagine that when Sky Woman scattered her handful of seeds across Turtle Island, she was sowing sustenance for the body and also for the mind, emotion, and spirit. She was leaving us teachers. The plants can tell us her story. We need to learn to listen.
Thank you. So what do you guys get from what is Robin Wall Kimmerer trying to say, in terms of hierarchies? You can just shoot ideas, whatever you understood. There's an exchange of values between humans and the earth. Yes. There's no hierarchy as such. Yeah. Hmm. Yes. While humans may be considered the smartest, we're highly dependent on the creatures all around us. Yes. Interdependence. Yeah. So basically, I think she's trying to shift the hierarchy that this Judo-Christian or Western notion is that humans are at the top. Even in Islam, there's the Ashraful Makhlukat, which is fine in a way. But I think if we are respecting more native ways of knowing, we will see that the earth has been here far longer than we have been. And the creatures that are living on the earth have been here far longer. And they are more like teachers to us rather than, things that we extract substances from, or something that is just to be extracted from. Um, and this kind of like switching of hierarchies um, is essential in informing the ethos as designers that we are not out there to save the planet or become the saviors of non-human personas that we're talking about, but entities that we can learn from and then cater to the needs for. And like we've said, it's more of an interdependence. It's more of like a dialogue rather than just we will save you. So, what are non-human personas? So, like Suzanne talked about, there was a whole spectrum of, design, and there was the individual, and then there was the human, community, life, climate. So, in life-centered design, in particular, non-human personas are used as a tool to understand the needs and perspectives of non-human actants. And actants is just a fancy way of saying creatures, but it's a life-centered design term, and it's also a tool to kind of create an emotional connection with these actors. Um, and why do we need them in our design practices? Because quantitative data is great. It helps us analyze the environment, the climate. The written papers and scientific research is great for understanding what is happening. But we also need a kind of like an emotional connection to the environment, to the non-human actors, to the climate. We need to have a voice of nature. And as designers, when we're designing for humans, we always make it, like putting the human at the center. So now we're just putting nature at the center and saying, okay, we need to listen to them in order to design for them. So it's more of like a biography of natural life, a plant, an animal, a village, an insect, a building, a legal entity. It's an emotional narrative that goes deeper than a traditional persona. So it's just a way of connecting with the subject. So having said that, now we're gonna jump into our activities for today. Yeah, I've just explained this, huh? Um, yeah, so before we go into the activities, we're just gonna highlight a few personas that we picked, which you guys can work with. So we're gonna break you into groups, and each group can select one persona. So one is the Indus River dolphin. Of course, there's a lot of work going on Gulhan. Uh, it's being impacted by low water flows and just it's been like rising temperatures has led to its dehydration. There's the Sindh ibex, which is facing heat stress because reduced availability of water. It's leading to its mortality, and it's suffering to behavioral change to cope with the heat. There's also a tree included in one of the personas, which is the Khejri. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but Khejri tree. Cholistan, it's found in Cholistan, and it's crucial for providing shade and food for desert animals. And in your research, you'll also find how it's great for it's a very important part of the ecosystem. Um, then there are honeybees. uh, yes, you can get a recording of this, but I'm just laying down the personas so that the personas you guys will be working with. So this is just an intro to all of them, and so that you can just pick one. Honeybees are, colony collapses due to high temperatures, crop yields affect with Horia, and, natural plant reproduction is being affected as well. And lastly, the common immigrant, which is a type of a butterfly. I'm sure you guys have seen it around. Um, it's less active in extreme heat, and because of that, it's resulting in lower pollination rates. So these were a few personas that you can choose from. Uh, and any questions so far, by the way? Or if I'm going way too fast, just let me know. Okay, no questions. So the first activity is to understand the personas. And we will do that through this web sort of a thing, um, where let me share the Miro link.
Let me stop sharing my screen. Um, wait, I can share this Miro thing also, and then you can talk through it maybe.
Okay, ठीक है.
I'm interested by the word persona. How is that different than user or any of the other words that we use when talking about design usually?
So, a persona is a way of, caricaturizing it, if I'm not wrong, Fazan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a way of characterizing our user, which is a non-human actant right now, and telling their story through their needs, motivations, description of their behaviors, just a sketch of who they are. And we're going to talk about that in more detail in the second activity. But in the first one, we are trying to understand where these personas are in the ecosystem. So first, in the first section, we're going to understand. So we're taking the brush-tailed possum, which is an um, Australian possum, uh, and we're gonna first see what is the place and function of the brush-tailed possum in the ecosystem. So if you zoom in a little bit, yeah, so this is how you guys will fill it out. Okay, it contributes to plant control, seed dispersal, pollination, nutrient cycling, and serving as prey for predators. And this is just a way of seeing iski place, what is its place in the ecosystem, and where does it lie in the hierarchy? What is the effect on the ecosystem when the non-human actant is suffering? Um, and this is an exploration into what happens um, to the forest, for example, where the possums are, and they heavily browse on eucalyptus leaves, and a reduction in possum numbers could lead to an overgrowth of eucalyptus, which is a parasitic invasive tree. So it might, affect the population of the overgrowth of eucalyptus. They also prey for a variety of predators. Um, and, a decrease in their numbers could lead to the predators preying on um, other forms of prey. And I've given an example, okay, if owls switch from hunting possums to hunting smaller mammals or birds, those populations could decline. Um, and then we move on to added value for humans when the non-human actant is thriving. And this is basically just to see is how are humans benefited when this brush-tail possum is kind of thriving in the environment. So in indigenous Maori cultures, possums have been sustainably harvested for food, fur, and other uses. Um, Healthy populations ensure that they continue without negatively impact. These practices continue without negatively impacting the ecosystem. And um, Aboriginal tribes use their skin for cloaks and depicting images and stories on them throughout life. So it's a very culturally important animal as well. And then you're gonna fill out added value for humans, added value for nature when the non-human actant is thriving. So how is the nature benefiting from it? Um, so I've just given an example of how it's a food source for large mammals and owls and guanas. They also fertilize flowers for many trees, and pollination is effective because of their presence. Um, and then in this activity, the second last thing that we're going to do is human needs that affect the non-human actors. So what is it that humans are doing that is affecting the population or the ability to thrive for this brush-tailed possum? They're being hunted for fur and they're being killed because they're considered pests in New Zealand. They're considered endangered and not endangered, but they're like a protected species in Australia, but they're pests in New Zealand. And lastly, what are the climate needs of the non-human actin, which is the brush-tailed possum? So the climate needs are what is essential for the possum in terms of climate to survive. So it needs access to fresh water sources. It prefers areas with moderate temperatures, and it needs shelters in the form of tree hollows or dense vegetation. So this is just like a web and an example of a non-human actant and how we mapped it on to understanding its position in the ecosystem. Um, I think, Fazan, let's do this first before I explain the second one,
ठीक है.
because it will.
Yes.
So we're gonna break you guys up into breakout rooms, and you can select a persona and start mapping the understanding non-human personas web to it.
Yeah.
Any questions?
And just sorry, before that, one, two, three disclaimers. It will, we understand, this might be too overwhelming. But like, and also, given we have just like around half an hour to these activities, the in a real world setting, you would obviously put in a lot more time, a lot more resources into finding out what these things are. But in the interest of time and just making sure that you just get the idea of how to go about it, just research whatever you can by Googling in the couple of minutes that we give you for this activity. And whatever you find, it's completely fine if it's not too fleshed out. But like if you answer the basic necessities of this web, you'll be good. But yeah, any questions?
Are we able to get access to either this mural board or the
Yeah.
PowerPoint?
Yes, I'll send the link to this Miro board. And what I'll also do is that I will put the personas on this Miro board, the pictures that we had. And then after the workshop is over, I can send you the link to the deck also, the slide deck. Let me
Yeah,
share the
thank you,
link.
because I think in the breakout room I will need this mural board.
Okay, yeah, definitely. I'm sharing it here. And I'm going to start putting you guys in rooms now. And so there'll be one person from Ideate in your rooms with you. So there's Ahmed with us also, who's also from Ideate. So if you have any question or anything, you can feel free to, just ask one of us to help you out if there's anything. But again, don't take too much pressure. It's just an activity to get you to, think about things differently. So yeah, you can start joining the rooms now. Okay, hi guys, welcome back. Ideally, we would have loved to, do like a share out where everyone just like talk, give a brief summary of the work they did. But we're out of time. We have just like 4 more minutes. So what we'll do is, after this ends, I'm going to share a couple of links. I'll share this Miro board. I'll share the slide deck with you guys. And then also the Tower of Silence thing I was talking about, I'll share a link to that. And then so that you can go through these things on your own. But right now, we'd love to hear, how this was and what your key takeaway was your main learning or anything new or insightful that you found. So yeah, feel free to just share whether in the chat or just unmute your mic and talk.
Something. Yes, I guess somebody talked about in the chat as well, how this is something which teaches us the interdependency of different kinds of species, not just species, but the plant itself. Plants are the non-human actors themselves in the environment. So I guess this was something good to like think about from that perspective as well. So we might have just like missed it sometimes when we are thinking of like even some kind of a population. We just feel like we just like inherently just think about people who are alive or who are just moving. So when we think it from such a way that those are also a part of the nature around us, so maybe we can be more inclusive or work on those things which actually need our attention.
Yes, yes, definitely. Anyone else? And this
Just a
also reminds me, sorry, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick add-on to that like thinking about non-human personas, I think वो interdependency वाली बात कि उनकी interdependence on other elements around them is maybe a lot more or like उनमें like when we're thinking about humans or humans as users or personas, that comes with some sort of grouping or some sort of individualism with them. But non-human
I think she dropped off, but yeah. Ibrahim is saying, with the psychotherapeutic we use to just build awareness over the life system that could be impacted, or can this become centered around the solution? So this one, it can be centered around the solution, but again, we were trying to just help all of you move towards being more aware of things. So this exercise particularly was designed in that way, to just be aware of other life systems, and then you can build upon this when you're really trying to center around that solution, center these, whether that's the bullan, whether that's the fidgety tree, yeah, or any of the other thing that you worked on. So, if you just look up planet-centered design or life-centered design, so there will be a lot of other tools, just some human-centered design, the way that we sort of use for human-centered design, whether that's journey mapping, empathy mapping, or everything else. So there is some adaptation of that used for when you're trying to design for non-human personas or, centering them around it. Maheen, this has been quite a good session in terms of inclusivity. Yes, thank you for that. That was the intention, that we just let you start to think about that. And hopefully, down the lane, we can also do one workshop on really centered design or life-centered design and what that involves and all of that.
I have
Thanks.
a question. Oh, sorry.
Yes, yes, sure.
Oh, I want to ask that in, let's say, a real company's, real industrial setting, after we have these non-human persona, what will be your next step?
The next step would be to, so, if you are, let's say your challenge is around something that humans are facing, and these are things that you need to be aware of, whether, what impact it has on the river dolphins or the beach or the other things. So whatever ideas you come up with to sort of solve for those humans, you make sure that those ideas or solutions or interventions are not doing a harmful effect on these personas that you just made. So you take into account, what are the human factors that are affecting these populations, and you make sure that your ideas are not one of those factors or are not contributing to that factor and making it worse for them. And in situations where you're really trying to center it around these life forms, that you need to make have a positive, not just neutral effect, but a positive effect on the population of bees or the trees or woodlands or anything else. So in that scenario, you try to actively do ideation exercises and come up with things that will benefit not just the humans, but also these dolphins and these other things. So the next step is essentially ideation and making sure that your ideas do not have a negative impact and actually have a positive impact on things.
Got it. It feels like we need to look from, because we're more familiar with human-centered design, so it's easy to think of what this and that needed for us. And that one is how we can generate money value. But I'm wondering, let's say if bigger company, they actually care about these non-human species because maybe that's not where the money comes from.
Yes, that is an important point, and that's always a struggle to make sure that you advocate for these things that don't really have a voice. And it's the same with human-centered design also, right? Sometimes you want to really advocate for the people who don't have a say, but the business factors don't align with that. So I think as a designer and as someone who just wants to advocate for better design and sustainability and climate-centeredness, that is just like a constant battle where you need to make sure that you're trying to convince the people who are the decision maker that these are important. And the first step towards that is just yourself being aware of it and yourself making conscious decisions that whatever design you propose to them is not affecting these things inversely. Okay. I think we're already 3 minutes above time, but thank you all so much for this. We had a really engaged audience. So Nayab and I were just talking. It was great having you as participants of this workshop. So yeah, thank you, and keep a lookout for Ideates pages for any other workshops and events that we do, and we'd love to have you on those too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Bye. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Nayab. Thanks, Fazan.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone else.